Hello and welcome to Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I interview entrepreneurs doing startups across borders and the investors who support them, with a focus on companies that have some relationship to Latin America. My guest today is my friend Adrian Fisher, CEO and founder of PropertySimple, a real estate technology company with offices in Santiago, Chile, and the United States. I've known Adrian for about 5 years now, and PropertySimple was our first investment at Magma Partners all the way back in 2014. Adrian and I cover his journey from Scottsdale, Arizona to Argentina, Chile, and then back to the United States, during which he learned to program, build technology for some of the biggest companies in the world with a 30-person outsourcing team based in Mendoza, and transitioned from a services company into a product company. In 2011, Adrian was part of Startup Chile's first round, where he and his team built multiple real estate technology businesses, including a rental payment system, a mortgage originator, and more. We'll also talk about Adrian's experience launching a product in Latin America and then transitioning to the US market, and the strategy he uses for building a technology business from Latin America that targets the US. PropertySimple just closed a $3 million financing round from US investors and is growing its team in Chile and the United States while scaling up in the States. I really enjoyed this conversation, so let's jump right in. Hello, Adrian. Welcome to the podcast.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing today?
Fantastic.
So where are we in the world today?
Santiago, Chile.
And why are we in Santiago?
I'm here working with my team. Launch a couple new products.
And what are you working on today?
Today, we're working on a few things, actually. A job portal, a new system to get seller leads for houses, and just a general update of our core product.
So you're from the U.S. originally. How did you end up with a team working on real estate tech in South America?
It's a long story. How far do you want me to go back?
As far back as we can.
Okay.
What brought you to Latin America in the first place?
That's actually a crazy story, a fun one. One of my best friends in high school was a Colombian guy. And when I graduated high school, I went to college, and he graduated and didn't go to college. So he went on this separate life adventure where he became a race car driver. And he was racing Formula 3 in Spain. And, we always kept in touch, but he just had this really exciting life. And, a few years passed, and I wasn't having such an exciting life. And he invited me to go out to Spain. And the idea is I was going to take his old job that he did part-time when he wasn't racing, which was drive cars down for Mercedes from Germany to Madrid, and they were going to pay me €1,000. And I was 23 at the time. I was like, where do I sign up for this? This is going to be fun. And so that was sort of the plan. About 2 weeks before I was going to fly out, he called me up and said, long story short, I'm sorry, but Toyota's going to send me to Argentina for a year, and the deal's off. And I had ran my mouth in Arizona and told everyone I knew that I was going on this awesome adventure, and there was just no way I could back down from it. So I told him I'd meet him in Buenos Aires, and we figured it out. And that's sort of what got the whole thing started, and it was quite the adventure, I guess.
And so you got to Buenos Aires, you started working with him, then what happened?
Well, yeah, it didn't get that far at all. So we got to Buenos Aires. This was in 2005. I was 23, and he had his first race in Cordoba. We go to Cordoba. He races, crashes the car, and they send him back to Spain. And so I was sitting there okay, now what? And the plan was just to stay, 2 or 3 months, have fun, backpack around, and then go home and get on with my life. And so what happened is I did that. I had a blast for 3 months. I spent all my money. I had a friend that came down with me. It was amazing. And about 2 weeks before I was going to go home, I just was thinking about going back to the States. It was going to be this thing where I'm going back to Arizona. It's super hot in the middle of summer. I didn't have a job. I had talked this big game that I was going to be away for a long time. And I was just turning that over my head, and that night I met somebody at the hostel I was with. It was a girl from Germany, and she's speaking English, and she turns around, talks to her friend in German, then she flips around and starts speaking perfect Spanish, and I was just blown away. I was like, who is this person? How do you do that? And I sort of got her story, and she's like, oh, well, I just stayed down here and, learned the language. And I was like, well, what do you mean you just stayed? She's like, I just hung out. I'm like, well, what'd you do for work? She's like, nobody starves down here. You'll figure it out. And I was like, but what, she's like, just chill here. Like, eventually something will happen.
And you didn't speak Spanish yet?
No, I didn't speak any Spanish. I was super impressed. And I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at chilling. I can do that. So that started. And so I let my plane ticket pass. My friend flew home. And I just stayed at that hostel. And eventually, I couldn't pay the hostel rent anymore. And so the guy that ran the hostel was like, okay, are you going to pay me? And I'm like, no. I'm not going to pay you. And then he's like, are you going to leave? I'm like, no, I'm not going to leave. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, well, will you go down to the bus stop and go get more gringos? Fill this place up.
So you became a gringo wrangler.
Yeah, so basically I was like that sketchy dude that went to go look for the gringos. So I'd wake up at like 6 in the morning, I'd go down to the bus stop in Cordoba, and then I'd go get the gringos and fill up that hostel. And the hostel was in sort of a seedy part of the town too. So I would go and, do my sales pitch and bring them in and fill that place up. So that was the start of it. That was very, very crazy.
And so how did you go from basically getting gringos to stay at a hostel to starting in tech?
Yeah, so what happened is I filled up the hostel. Things were good there, and I was staying for free. And after a couple months, I wanted to stay for a whole year. That was my idea. I was like, I'm going to stay for the whole year. I don't want to work at a hostel. I want to get a real job. And so I started looking for jobs, and it was just nothing was panning out. Like at the time, I think you could work at a call center for $200. And I just didn't feel like that was for me.
And that's $200 a month.
Yeah, $200 a month.
Yeah.
Right? And so I had this idea to make a website. And I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to make a website, and I'm going to sell stuff from here to the United States. And I was Googling around what stuff can you sell without paying a huge import tax on, or export tax, I'm sorry, from Argentina. And one thing was art. So with a friend that I made at the hostel, we started this site, artargentina.com. And I had some experience before that with one of my uncle's company. I was an intern. And at one of his startups. And so I'd seen like this whole startup thing. I'd seen tech, but I didn't really know much about it. And I just wanted to basically get paid to play with the computer. And I said that would be my ideal job. I like that kind of stuff. But I didn't really know how to make a nice website. So I took a bunch of tutorials. I didn't have a computer. So I would go to these things called cyber cafes. You can rent the computer. And at the time it was, you sit in this room with all these people playing video games, you know? And I would pay, it was like $2 for the day. And I was just taking tutorials on, WordPress and on e-commerce stuff in PHP. And eventually I built the site.
And what made you decide to go and sit in a cyber cafe with no computer? If you didn't know a computer, you didn't know how to program, what made you do that?
I don't know. I thought I could. I mean, I knew that I wasn't going to get a job, and my position at the hostel was very secure. So I had all the time in the world all of a sudden. And so I'd work in the morning, fill the place up, and then I'd go sit in the cyber cafe. And I just started taking tutorials after tutorials.
And so you did all the self-learning. How long did it take you to be able to build your first site?
It was about a month.
A month.
Yeah, so I built an e-commerce site. I forget what I was using at the time. It might have been Drupal or something. And I installed it and designed it. And it was at the time, it was a great site. And I went around with my friend and got all the local artists, and we put all the stuff on the site. We had like 30 artists and like 100 paintings. And we thought it was the best thing in the world. And then started the part where I actually had to sell art. And I was just, cold calling friends of friends and, friends of my parents and whoever I could to try to buy something. And after about a month, I couldn't get anyone to buy anything. And I was just like, this is horrible. But what I did keep getting is when I was trying to sell people the stuff, they'd go to my site and they'd be like, you know what, I'm not going to buy any art from you, but this is a great site. Like, who made it? And it clicked one day. I was like, well, I made the site. They're like, well, would you make me one? I'm like, yeah, for $1,000, I'll make you a site. And $1,000 in Argentina in 2005 was like a ton of money. And eventually one person said yes. And so I made them a website. And then I made that website. And the guy that ran the hostel was like, oh, well, now that you make websites, will you make me a website? So I made him a website. So now it was 2 websites in. And I didn't really need to work at the hostel anymore because that was part of the negotiation. I was like, I'll make you this website. I don't want to go down a bus stop anymore. And I want a better room too. And so the guy put me below the hostel, like there's this construction zone, but it was like there was no one down there, and I had this like my own private room and stuff. And so then I was sort of set. That's how it started, and from there it just, I did a couple like that, and it sort of clicked that I could turn that into a business.
And how many people do you think how many people would you have to call to get one website to say yes, or one client to say yes?
The first ones were sort of easy because it was just people I knew. But then once I started trying to actually sell websites, then it got crazy. And when it clicked that like, well, maybe I shouldn't sell art, I should sell websites, more people need them, then, the light went off. I got a couple more sites from people I knew. And then it was like, okay, now I'm going to turn this into a business. And I would sit there on Skype and just cold call people in the phone book. And I think before we sold our first website, it was over, I don't know, a couple hundred. I want to say 1,000, but it's probably less than 1,000.
And how did you decide which people to call?
So what I would do is I'd look in the phone book and I'd look for guys with big ads, and then I would Google them, and I'd see if they had a website or if it sucked, and then I'd call them up and be like, yeah, who does your marketing, and then, I see you have this big ad in the yellow pages, but your website's horrible.
And what made you keep going when you had a couple hundred or even maybe 1,000 no's before you got your first client that you didn't know?
Well, I knew I only needed one website, and that would take me a very long time. So I just ran the numbers, and I was like, if I just sell one website per month, that's $1,000 versus that $200 I was going to earn. That's just a way better gig.
Yep.
Yeah.
And why do you think you were willing to call that many people and get all those no's compared to a lot of other people that maybe would have called 5 or 10 of them and said, oh, this is terrible?
It was terrible. I don't know. I mean, I really did not enjoy it. And to the point I didn't enjoy it that the moment I could give that job to somebody else, it was the first thing I did. It was the very first thing I did.
So talking about you now have, if you were able to give that job, you now have an employer or two. How did you build that business? What was it, 1 year where you're doing literally one website per month, or how fast did it go?
This is actually a really funny story. So the first employee was the best. And there's a great story behind it. So I was still living in the hostel, and I had this friend and from the States, and one day we met up, and he's like, hey, I met this girl, and she's got 2 computers. And, and we just started laughing because he knows I don't have a computer, and I sit at that cyber cafe all day. And he's like, you should go meet her, and there's this girl, Jenny. He told me, that she's at the Hard Rock Cafe, go down and meet her. So I went to the Hard Rock Cafe, found this girl, introduced myself, said, hey, my friend, Joe, met you the other day and thought we should hang out. And, she had 2 computers. Turned out she did something with tech. And immediately I was like, I have this company and I want, I'm making websites for states. You should come work for me. And she just was laughing. You're crazy. And I remember I was so broke at the time. I don't think we could even pay for the cafe that we were at. And we became friends, and I kept asking her all the time to come work for me. And at the same time, I knew that I needed a real programmer, not myself. So a friend of a friend knew a programmer. I didn't know any programmers. And he's like, there's this guy, he's really good. But he has a job, and he works remote from the U.S. And he was from Argentina. He was an Argentine. And so I went to go talk to this guy, Lucas. And I was like, hey, Lucas, I want you to come work for me. And he was just like, no way am I going to go work for some crazy gringo in a cyber cafe when I have a real job. And so I kept getting no's from Lucas. I kept getting no's from Jenny. Then I wanted a designer too. So I had this whole plan to build this team. And there was this other designer that a friend introduced me to named Glass. And so I went and go talk to that guy. Nobody would pull the trigger and come work for me. And so it was just this thing where I kept asking everyone to come and join me. And at one moment, Jenny was like, all right, I'll do it. I'll come work for you. You can borrow my computer, And I had this friend, Fred, that had an apartment. And we're like, we'll go to Fred's house and we can work in his living room. And I was like, sweet. And so I put Jenny on the phone. Poor Jenny. She got the worst of it. So she started the cold calling. And then I was making these really bad websites. And then that's when it all came together. So the moment that Jenny started working for me, I went out to Lucas and I said, hey, Jenny is working for me, check this out. And immediately I could tell that Lucas liked Jenny. And I was like, if you come work with me, you can sit right next to her over at Fred's house. And this actually worked. He's like, yes, I'll do it. And so he quit his job and he came and worked with us in Fred's house. And then Glass was like, well, if Lucas is there and Jenny's there, then I'm in. And so then all of a sudden, within a span of like 3 months, we had a team. And it was mostly Jenny doing the sales and the cold calling. And then me coordinating and doing everything with the guys.
And so how did it go from there?
Well, it started off really, really slow. Just lots of cold calling. I think we got a first client that wasn't a friend with Jenny on the phone. And that was Manny, this guy from Arizona. And he had a company called B2B Hispanic. It was crazy. But he liked the sound of Jenny's voice. That was the end of the day when we finally met him years later. That was what sold him. And, he gave us a bunch of work, that guy. And so we started there. And so that first year was really, really hard. I think we had something like $5,000 to $8,000 or something in sales in a year. And we all lived off that.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was year one, which is crazy.
And then where did it go from there?
So year one was intense. There was some drama that happened right around the end of year one that involved our friend Fred, who lent us the apartment company. So there was a situation where we had to leave Fred's house.
All right.
And Lucas and Jenny decided to start their own company. And I decided to move cities, start another company, doing the same thing.
So you went from Cordoba to where?
So I went from Cordoba to Mendoza with a friend that I had made and basically started again. And I was in Mendoza. It was just a really cool city. And
let's jump back for a second
let's go back
to Cordoba.
Let's go back to Cordoba.
Probably hardly anybody that's listening to this knows much about Cordoba. What's it like? What's the tech scene like? Or what was it like then?
So in 2005, Cordoba is the second largest city in Argentina. Back then, it was not like touristic at all. There was no Americans down there. And it was just a crazy city. It's where most of the Argentines go to study. I think there's like 8 universities there, and it's an old city. They have buildings from the 1400s there. And it was a wild place to live, actually.
It must have been a really hard place to learn Spanish. That's one of the places that I have the hardest time understanding people, if anywhere in South America.
Yeah, it was. Well, I didn't learn a ton of Spanish down there that first year. It was more just running around trying to make money to get through the year. But it was a really cool experience.
So with a lot of students, are there good tech workers, good engineers, people like that?
Today there is. Today there's a ton. Back then, I think there wasn't much of a scene at all there. When we had started, like to find this one guy, Lucas, was like a miracle. Yeah.
So then, you moved to Mendoza. And what's Mendoza like compared to Cordoba? Yeah,
so Mendoza is a totally different experience. It's where they produce the majority of wine in Argentina. And it's very laid back. It's a mountain town. I like it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. A good place to go to eat and drink for a long weekend.
Exactly.
And so you moved there and you started again selling websites. Yeah,
starting websites. So we had this fallout in Cordoba. There's a great story I want to tell about the fallout. But long story short, Jenny and Lucas got married and moved back to the U.S. They live in L.A. now.
So your first 2 employees got married.
Yeah. So I saw them last year, 10 years later, and they had their first kid, and they're happy, and they're just awesome.
That's
pretty
great
cool. People.
So they moved on. They got married. They started their own business.
Yep.
And you moved to Mendoza.
I moved to Mendoza, and I made this friend Mike at a hostel.
Yep.
So I was contemplating flying home after this fallout, and I met this guy, and we started talking, and I was telling him about what I was doing, and he was like, "Hey, there's not a lot of people that do that down here. You should keep doing it." It sort of talked me right back into it. And he's like, "Why don't we go out to Mendoza for a week and just hang out and see how it goes. And so we went out, we had a good time, and he's like, you should really keep doing this. He was very persistent. And so I was like, okay. And he's like, yeah, I'll help you out, I'll stay down here and we can, I'll help you in sales. So I said, well, sure enough, why not, And we were looking for a place, and I saw another cyber cafe, and it was going out of business. And we went in there and talked to the guy, and he's like, yeah, I got to sell all my computers and stuff. So we went and bought 4 computers, took it back to our apartment, and then we've negotiated and rented the place that we were in and started again. And so I started doing a bunch of work for those clients that I built and started looking for people to help me out. The first person I met was a designer. She was like the next door neighbor. I met her in the elevator. Uh-huh. I was like, oh, you can design and you live next door? Great. Like, you're hired. And that sort of grew into something I did for another 6 years.
So you built a business doing development over 6 years. What did that look like? Where you started from buying 4 used computers from a going out of business cyber cafe yeah. and hiring your next door neighbor. How did you build the business, and how big did it get?
We got to about 20 people in total.
Wow.
And some pretty good sized clients as well. Things started slow again, and at one point though we got our first break, which was from this guy. He just called us looking for a Durpal specialist, and at the time I was good at that stuff. And I don't know how he found us, but he called us with this site that was it was for the U.S. government, and just said, hey, can you fix this thing? And we went into it, and it was just a total disaster. And with my team, we said, look, we can't fix it, but we can rebuild it. And we rebuilt the whole thing in 30 days and gave it back to him for, I don't know, it was like, $2,000 or $3,000 or something. And this guy was blown away. And he called me back a week later, and he's like, I want you to do everything that I got. And he just handed me, this one guy just handed me so much work. And that all of a sudden was our break. It turned out that site they had spent $60,000 on, and it was just a complete train wreck. And they'd spent 8 months doing it, and we did it in a month. Uh-huh. And he took notice and was the conduit to a bunch of big jobs for us over the next 5 to 6 years.
And when you realized that you had only charged $2,000 to do something in a month that he had been trying to do for 60, what did you think?
Well, first it took me a long time to realize it, uh-huh. because he didn't tell me. It was only after like a year later when things were rocking and he had my shop just packed that I flew out and met him, and then realized what was really happening. That, we were taking a 90% haircut or something. Uh-huh. So that obviously turned into us making more money and more people, and it was a really cool experience though.
And what did you learn? Do you have any tips or things that you learned for either someone who's thinking about outsourcing development, or if you're running a dev shop from abroad to get clients, or thinking about freelancing?
That's a lot of stuff. If you're going to outsource, it really matters who your project manager is on the ground. And it's, I guess I would say, just really look at past performance, look at stuff that they've done. If you can, do a small project first.
So what if you had to hire an outsourced developer today that's not even in your same country? Maybe it's in the same country, but something that's not in your own company. What would be like the 3 to 5 questions you would ask or tell people that they should ask?
Again, I would ask for a portfolio. I would want to see real work that they shipped. I'd probably want to talk to past clients, mm-hmm. and then I'd want to do a small test project. I'd really just want to work with the guys on something small.
And what about from the either single freelancer that's thinking about starting to do outsource stuff or working on their own to or starting their own dev shop somewhere in the world? What kind of advice would you give them when they're just getting started?
Well, looking back on when I was just getting started, I really, really wanted to do it. That was the thing. I remember when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. I knew nothing about this kind of stuff. And it was just something that I wanted. So I started reading and started thinking about it. When I had my first clients, I just didn't know anything. I think the first thing I say is that's totally normal. Like, you're just not going to know in most cases. Like, what do you charge? So obviously, I mean, today there's so much more information. You can just Google that kind of stuff. But that would be the biggest thing. Just do it. The second thing is it takes a long time. The first lesson that I learned is a story with my dad. I'd called him up when I started selling websites after doing the art thing, and I was like, hey, do you know anyone who might want a website? And he's like, you know, you said you were going down there with a race car driver, and then you said you're selling art, now you said you're selling websites. He's like, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to recommend any of my friends. And I was like so hurt. I was like, I hung up the phone. I was like, oh, my own dad won't even help me sell. You know, I'm such a loser. And then I thought about it, and I was like, you know, he's got a point. If you change what you do every 6 months, like, no one's going to believe you. And I knew that if I was doing this a year from now and I had a bunch of clients, that would change things. And it did. So just blocking out a serious chunk of time, let's say like 3 years or something, where you say, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to know how to do it, but 3 years from now I'm going to be an expert at it. I think that's really important. And I don't think that a lot of people have that in their mind, that maybe 2 years will be just horrible. You know, and you're just going to have to be okay with that.
Yeah, I see that from a lot of people that are thinking about starting a business that maybe have the wrong idea, where they've sort of bought into the rock star entrepreneur culture, that they think, oh yeah, it's going to be easy, let's get this going. But at the end of the day, it's just not even close to being true. What made you switch from a service to a product company?
And I came up with the idea of, you know, if we can't just build products for everyone right now, we should build our own product. I mean, we have the talent, we've learned a lot over the years, and now is the time to do something. And so after thinking about it, we decided to do something not in the US. So we said, well, why don't we try to solve a local problem? And with one of the developers, we started thinking, what is the biggest problem that we have here in, you know, that we deal with every day? And one night I was at home with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and we were talking about the rent. We had this guy that would come on a little motorcycle, and he'd pick up the rent for our apartment, and then he would do that for the office too. And that was just how it was done. They'd pick up the rent in cash, and they'd give you like this little piece of paper saying that they got it. But that guy, every 6 months, would just steal the money. And, you know, then they'd find, like, if you didn't have that little paper, you'd have to pay it again, right? And so we always had that little paper, but I just thought it was crazy that this whole country was paying their rent with cash, and their solution was a motorboy. And if you stole the money, well, you know, you just take a hit once or twice a year, and that's the end of it. So we knew that there could be a better way, and we decided to build a payment system that would, you know, you could pay at multiple locations in cash if you wanted to.
Why, for people listening in the U.S. or even in Chile, why do people pay in cash? Can't they just send a check?
No. So Argentina is a crazy story. They had a crisis where one day basically the banks just took all the money that was in it. So if you had $100 in the bank or $1 million in the bank, you woke up one morning and you had no money. They said, okay, well, now we'll give you 100 pesos, which wasn't worth anything. And that basically just destroyed their banking system and their confidence in the banks. And people just had this culture of paying for everything in cash. And there's, you know, there's a whole story behind it. But I think this was in 2009 or something when we started this thing, that it was just odd that they would still be doing that. And I figured that we could solve it. So we started on that. We decided, okay, we're going to build this payment system where you could pay cash at, say, the supermarket or an ATM machine, or maybe if you had a bank account, you could pay online, and we could digitize that transaction and match it with the landlord. And we developed this whole system to do that, and we took about a year to code it up and get it running, and we did. It was actually the hardest thing probably that I've ever done, just to get that thing working.
And what was the local Argentines' reaction when you told them that you were, one, building this, and then two, when they saw it in action?
It was insane. Nobody believed us. we said, yeah, we're going to build a payment system where you could go pay at the supermarket your rent. And, friends were just like, no, you can't. You can't do this. It's impossible. And I remember we were 1 year working on this thing, trying to get the code, trying to convince the banks to let us take a transaction. Like, we had to do crazy stuff. We'd go to one bank and be like, hey, we want to work with you. We're going to go take people's rent money, store it at your bank, and then give it to the landlord. And as a foreigner and an engineer, the two of us going into these banks, it was pretty wild. I remember people just saying, no, this is illegal, you can't do it. And I'm like, well, we are doing it. And eventually we got one bank to say yes. And then we got some of these providers that take cash, right, to integrate us as a like, what do you call that? A service provider or something.
Like one of the payment options?
Yeah, one of the payment options. So first we got the banks to do it, and they got them to put us in their ATM machines. So you go to the ATM machine, you'd see our company name in there. It's called Pago tu Alquiler. It was the craziest thing ever, I thought. And then we got the other people to accept us as a payment provider, processor, and then we'd show up in their systems. And so this whole process took maybe a year and a half, and you couldn't really see it. And the economy started recovering in the U.S., and people started calling me back, and I wouldn't take any jobs. And I remember my girlfriend at the time, she thought I was crazy. We were living in this apartment. We had lost all the money that we'd had. And we were living in this apartment for $200 a month outside of town. And people were offering me like real jobs again. And I was like, no, I'm working on something, And yeah, it was wild. It was really wild to write a payment system in Latin America. No one had ever done it before.
And so you got it launched. People started using it. Then what happened?
Yeah, so we launched it. You know the story, actually. Yeah, so we launched it, and we got our first 15 customers, and they loved it, and people paying loved it, and it was awesome. And that lasted for about maybe 30 days or something. I think we got to the second payment cycle, and the next thing we know, we got all the phones at once started ringing, and it was the landlords. The Argentine government had basically started garnishing people's rents. They were like, oh, you have money? Like, great, pay the taxes on it. And all of our clients wanted to quit, obviously, and there's nothing that we could do about it. And so that was sort of a wake-up call and sort of a bonehead move. Like, that's why they were doing it in cash, right? So that was like one of the biggest reasons was to avoid taxes, I assume. And so I had just totally not thought of that.
So you spent a year and a half building a product and found out after 30 days of use that people were going to be not happy to use it.
Yeah. I just didn't think, it never occurred to me that they would, their tax system would just go straight into their bank account so quickly and just take the money out. That concept didn't exist to me.
So what was your next move? You had invested so much time into something that wasn't working.
Yeah, so, I mean, for one part, I was just happy because I had built this, like, impossible thing. And I felt pretty good about it, actually. Even though, 30 seconds later, I was terrified because it was totally not going to work. And so I wanted to sort of get it out of the country to some place where it would work. And I started hunting around for investment because we didn't, the company that we had before had basically died, and then we spent all this time trying to build this thing. We had no cash. And so we started looking for investment, and it was hard to get investment in Argentina, almost impossible. The whole concept of like startups didn't exist down there.
Well, especially not in Mendoza at that time.
In Mendoza, it didn't exist at all. And I had this friend from Australia that had money, and he was like, well, I'll give you 20 grand. And I thought, oh, perfect. This is going to save us. With this money, we can get out of here, and we can figure this out. And we had tried to bring the money in, and they had this law where you could bring in foreign investment, but the government would take, I think, like 20 to 30% of it, just right off the bat, and then they would stipulate how you repaid that money. So you only had like a year to pay it back. And it was some crazy thing that I couldn't understand. So that wasn't going to work. And then I called an old client of mine, this guy Sam Ochman, and he had told me, no, have you heard of Startup Chile? And then I had read about it, but it didn't really click. And he's like, oh, they're giving away free money if you move to Chile. You should talk to this other guy. You should call my lawyer. He knows all about it. So I called this lawyer guy, and he was like, yeah, I'm actually working with the program of Startup Chile. Meet me at the W in Santiago, and I'll tell you all about it. And I remember being like, okay, perfect. Hang up the phone, and it was like a week later I had to be in the W, and I had no money, and I took this bus from Mendoza and like crossed the Andes, landed in Santiago. I don't know anyone here, and
that's a long bus ride. I've driven that. It's like 12, 13 hours because of the border stop in the middle.
Yeah, it's
like a 20-minute flight.
Yeah, 20-minute flight and a very long bus ride. But we took the bus, and we rented an apartment in the Central, right? Downtown. And I remember I went to Startup Chile, and I was like, I want to see this. Like, I don't believe that anyone would give you $40,000. I remember thinking that at the time. It was like so much money, and I just didn't believe it.
And this was in like early to mid 2011?
Something like that.
You were round one?
Round one.
So I was round 0. I was the pilot round. And I was ending in April or May of 2011. So you were probably right around then, just getting in.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't been accepted to Startup Chile or anything. I came out just to meet this guy, to hear about the program. And the day before I met him, I went to the office downtown where they were, and I just walked in. And I saw Diego, actually. And I'm like, hey, you work here? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, so this thing is real? Like, tell me all about it. And he's like, who are you? Like, you just showed up unexpected in our office. And he showed me it was real, and then the next day I met with this guy, and he told me all about the program.
So that must have been like February or March.
Yeah.
So we either like saw each other, and didn't say anything, or just I wasn't in the office that day.
I walked in.
That would have been right then.
Yeah, I walked in. I saw some people there, but I couldn't tell who was working there, like who worked for the government or who was like an entrepreneur. Just people like hanging out. And I was only there for like 30 minutes because I think they were sort of like shooting me out of there, you know. So anyways, so I applied, and thankfully we got in. I sent a video recording. I snuck into an ATM machine in Argentina and recorded us paying at the ATM. I think that was what did it.
Got you in.
Yeah.
So you got to Chile. You had the $40,000 grant from the government, where they give you you had your visa, you had your bank account, all that stuff.
Yep.
And you were in round one. My round should have been round one, but they got rid of us. They call us round 0.
That's right.
But and you got going. And what was it like going from Argentina to Chile in those first 6 months?
For me in particular, it was just an amazing experience. I had felt like I was in a vacuum there, I guess. At the time, I didn't know anyone else that was working on their own product or that, had that kind of experience. And everyone just sort of looked at me like I was crazy back then. So when I got to Startup Chile, I was in a room with 100 other kids that were trying to do something. Young people that were building real businesses, and I was just blown away at that whole energy. That was the first time I heard of like this concept of a startup. It just wasn't really a thing at the time. And
so, how long did it take you to build the same version of the product in Chile that you had in Argentina, or a similar version?
Yeah, so we actually got really lucky. We got a big break when we got to Chile. So when we were trying to find a way out of Argentina, when this whole thing was going south, we started writing people in Chile that had payment systems, and we wrote like everybody. And so no one replied to us, but when I got into Startup Chile, they said, hey, there's this new thing, and you have a padrino. There's a guy who has a business here.
It's a godfather for the non-Spanish speakers.
The godfather. They said, we got you the godfather. He's going to pick you up from the airport. He's a local business person. He's going to show you the ropes in Chile. I received an email before I got here. And so I was like, yeah, okay. And the godfather that picked me up was this guy, Danton, who owned the largest ticketing system in the country. And he also owned like the largest payment system in the country. And he was one of the guys that we had emailed like furiously before we left to try to find somebody in Chile to work with. And he said Startup Chile had reached out to him, and he saw all these people. And he's like, these guys have been emailing me for 6 months. And he recognized our name, and so he picked us. And so he picked us up from the airport, and he took me to my apartment that I had rented on the internet, sight unseen, and it was in a real bad part of town. And he's like, you can't stay here. And so he took me to his house, and I lived with him for like a couple months. And we became good friends, and this guy just opened the doors for me. So I had sort of a unique experience because I had the largest guy in my niche, and he was my roommate, sleeping on his couch, which was just insane. So that helped.
And so you built the rental payment system here, and you started going. You got some clients.
Yep. So we got the system up and running probably before the end of Startup Chile. So within 6 months, Danton helped a ton to get us the bank accounts we needed and to sort of put some weight behind it. People had the same questions like, you can't do this. It's sort of is this illegal or not? Are you building a bank? What are you doing? And he helped us get that sorted out. So by the end of Startup Chile, we had the product running. We were taking rents, and the whole thing was sort of working again.
Yeah. So with Danton helping you, I want to sort of highlight that in Latin American countries, connections are much more important than they are in the U.S. In the U.S., they are important, but when I was thinking about starting Magma, I knew that even if I could find the money from people who had invested with me previously or people in the tech scene in the States, I wouldn't really stand a chance unless I had a local person who was a successful business person that could sit down with banks or big companies and give credibility to it. Credibility from a local perspective. And so what Adrian had with Danton and what I had with Francisco, who's my partner with Magma, is super, super important.
Yeah, that was the key. That sort of unlocked everything, and it was amazing. Right after that, we got into this thing with BBVA Bank. They had just started this innovation department, and we were one of the top sort of companies in our round, and so we got into that as well. And they became our banking partner to hold all the money. So, we charge all these rents, but they sit in our float account over at BBVA for a couple days.
And after a while, you were processing a couple $1 million a month, right?
I think at the peak before we handed that company off, it was doing real money. And it is today, as far as I know, the largest rental payment system in Chile.
Well, and so it seems like it was doing well. Why wasn't it the greatest business?
Well, there was a lot of reasons why it wasn't a great business, but here the biggest is there's no insurance for that kind of anything that sort of falls out of non-traditional here. There's not banking products for it. So we would be processing, let's say, $1 million, but it was completely uninsured. And we rely on lots of banks and their APIs and the connections to the banks and their technology to make this thing work. And so when a banking API would go down, we could lose $20,000 in 15 minutes. And then it would start working again. And it would be really hard to identify. We'd get a bug, right? We'd see something in our error logs, but then we'd start to track down that, no, a bunch of money went missing. And we'd call the banks, and the banks didn't know about it. So imagine, you lose 20 grand in 15 minutes, you call up your banking partner, and they don't know or barely care. And, your clients that lost that money, they can't even know about it. So we'd have a $100,000 float account, and we would just take the money out, plug the hole, nobody would know, and then we'd go fight with the banks. And so this went on for years. We'd constantly be fighting with the banks for our money back. They'd find the transaction sometimes 3 months later. Oh, yeah, there was a bug. Sorry, dude. And it was just crazy stressful. So you add that up, and also it was a low-margin business. Even though that these were high-value transactions, you wouldn't make a lot of money from them. You could, max you could charge a couple percentage points.
Yeah, because people probably don't want to pay a huge percentage of the rent just for the convenience, right?
No, not at all.
And so when you saw, okay, this is really risky, I'm not making a ton of money, even though the tech is successful and people like the product, what did you think and what did you decide to do?
Well, it was an interesting one. So we had this thing that automated the rental payment system. And it also automated a ton of property management itself, which was really helpful. So the companies that had contracted us, they could go from, say, for every 100 units, they'd have to hire a person. Now they could go to 1,000 units before they hired a person. So you can manage, 2,000 units with just a few people. And that efficiency was a huge part of the system. And so we had started thinking about it as a team, like, okay, this piece of the business is really good, but what if you could also do the sales side? You could connect them all together and have the full cycle, the life cycle of the property, right? Where you drive demand for a property. I had some banking relationships. I bet you we could finance them as well, and then kick them off to investors out here, and they could rent them out, and we can fully manage them as well. So I saw this life cycle vision, and my partners and I were excited about that. We decided, hey, if we really want to do this, we should build the whole thing. And that was an inflection point for us.
And so you went out and decided you wanted to build new tech. You're still working with the bank.
That's right.
And you started looking for an investment partner, right?
Right. We knew that to scale up to that kind of size, we'd need real money. And so we started looking for our first investment. And we had found somebody that was willing to give us $2 million, which for here was a lot of money.
It still is a lot of money.
Yeah.
There's not many $2 million investments in all of Latin America tech outside of Mexico and Brazil each year.
Yeah. At the time, it was wild, but we had sort of a really good track record. We went through Startup Chile, we went through the BVA thing, we had good partnerships, we were processing a lot of money. Everything looked like it was fine. And we had a nice vision to wrap up the full property cycle. And so as part of that effort, we found an investor, and things were great. We had probably 2 months of negotiation, and right on the day that we're about to sign it, one of the partners in the company decided to ask for more money, which I thought was crazy. And I was not expecting it. And the guy just looked at us like, are you shitting me? And left. And I remember I'd ran out of there trying to call him back, being like, no, we don't mean it, The guy's like, I don't care. And
so one of the guys went rogue.
Yeah, somebody went rogue on the team, one of our newer partners, and blew up the deal. And so I just couldn't believe it. And then that was from bad to worse. 2 days later, our partners internally in the company decided they were going to quit. They said, you know what, if there's no money, we don't want to do it. One partner went back to his old job, and then my partner that I'd worked with forever, he's just like, dude, I'm not going to keep doing this. Like, no cash. We have this team we can barely pay. I want out. And, I tried to convince him not to leave, but he was pretty sure on it. And so he did. And unfortunately, he was also the smarter partner, probably. He knew how to run the payment system. I was the engineer that built all those crazy APIs, and I knew that I couldn't keep it running. So he said, hey, I own 50% of the company. What do you want to do? And he's like, I personally would like the product. I think I can do a better job at it. So I gave it to him.
And so that left you with the vision for the full cycle, the banking relationship, and
no product. Yeah.
So then that's sort of where, we'd been talking and having lunches, for like 2-3 years by then, every once in a while.
Me and you?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great story. So Nathan and I are friends from Startup Chile.
Yep.
Nate had just started his fund. And when I was trying to raise the $2 million, Nate was like, hey, we'd like to invest. I'm like, oh, no, we're too big for you. You can't invest. Like the valuation's way too high. We thought we were so cool. And the deal falls through. My partners quit. They take the product with them. Like some of the employees had quit. It was just me and a sales guy in the office. And I think I was like 10 grand in debt. And I'm just sitting there like, I am so screwed. And I remember thinking about it for like a day, like panicking. And then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna call up Magma and Nate. I'm gonna go ask him for money, And I remember thinking like, well, there's a small chance that they'll give it to me. And so I called Nate, Francisco, and Diego into the room. Like it was like a day later, and I remember I thought it was dramatic because it was all empty and there's just me sitting there. And I was like, guys, I need to tell you something. And you're like, yeah, what's up? How's the investment going? I'm like, well, the investment blew up. My partners quit. I gave them the product, and I'm all alone. You know, and you guys are just like, Jesus, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, not only that, I need $50,000.
I think you asked for a lot more. If I remember, I think you asked for like $200K, something like that.
I don't know. I thought it was $50K.
I think you asked for more, if I remember it right. We were like, I don't know. I mean,
no, you bursted out laughing. You guys just started laughing, and I was like, I'm dead serious. I need some cash. Like, I'm gonna rebuild it, you know. Mm-hmm. And I remember you guys were like, I don't know what our valuation was when we were trying to raise before. It was like 7 million. And you're just like, yeah, drop it to 1, rewrite your business plan, and come back.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, fair enough. And that's what we did. Yeah, I rewrote the business plan, came back, pitched you guys again, and like, obviously you said yes, mm-hmm. which was insane at the time, but
well, we had seen what you'd built before and the track record, and also, you know, your hunger to make it work.
Yeah.
And so, you know, also the business model of that full life cycle of the property made sense, especially because my other business partner and I, VJ, who are ex-Startup Chile, who's an ex-Startup Chile person, and I had been doing some real estate in Chile as well. So it fit with pain points that we had personally, and we saw that, you know, you'd been able to build stuff before, so we thought it was a good bet. And so it ended up being that it was Propiedad Fácil back then, along with Ray Studio, were the first 2 investments that we did in Magma back in a little over 3 years ago now, I think. It was like early 2014 is when it was.
Yeah.
And so you got the idea, you got the $50K from us.
Yeah.
And you had your vision. What'd you do next?
Yeah, I just remember it being a big ask when I was in that empty room. But you guys said yes, and we were off to the races. So, you know, right after that, I started hunting for new engineers, new people to help me build this. And I had sort of a half-done property portal that I built with some friends in Mendoza. Sort of a side project that we're trying to morph into that full vision, but it was a separate piece of technology. And I went looking for my first engineer, and we interviewed a ton of people, and we found our friend Boris. And he was just sort of the perfect guy for the job. Scrappy, wanted to learn, and I knew that he would put up with some drama.
And so people might be thinking, well, you only had $50K. How far can you make $50K go, or how far did you make $50K go in Chile?
We made it go pretty far. So Boris, he's got his own story, but he had taken a break from the university, and he needed to make some money. And we had a little bit, so we hired him immediately, and he worked for a very reasonable wage. And the two of us did a lot. So
some context there is that unlike the US or Europe, where if you've got really good skills and you're a college dropout, you can get hired pretty much anywhere, if you're a good engineer. In a lot of parts of Latin America, that's just not true at all. Not going to make it past even sending your resume in. Even if you've worked at some of the best startups, it's going to be really tough to go work for a big retailer or a bank, because they really, really, really value the degree. So if you're a startup with not maybe a ton of money, you can find really great people that are really, really smart, but just either weren't able to finish university, didn't want to, or just needed money. And so that's one of the advantages that we've seen being down here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of a sad thing, you know, but Boris was great. The two of us started working together, and then we found another guy. So we had a friend from New York that had a financial startup who's very demanding, let's say. And he had his, brother-in-law? Yeah, his brother-in-law was learning to code with him. And so this guy, Pablo, he came from agriculture degree.
Yeah, he worked managing a winery.
Yeah, he worked managing a winery and said, you know, I had enough of this. and was learning how to code. And so this guy was just getting beat up for 6 months learning to code with a friend of ours. And I just never saw anyone work that hard. So I went and asked my friend, hey, can we hire Pablo? And he's like, yeah, please. So we had our 2 developers, and that was the start. It took us about 3 to 4 months probably to get the whole site running again. And during that time, I had been lobbying BBVA to give me a second contract. I used my relationship there to get a contract to originate mortgages. So they had their online mortgage department, which I knew was just a dog. I mean, they were doing 800 mortgages, I think, per month, and online they were doing 2 for the whole country. And I was like, we could just do so much if they let me have it. So I'd lobbied them. I went and spoke on behalf of the bank at this event, and they finally gave me a shot. They gave me a pilot program, and with that was a $100,000 check as well. So between that plus your investment, we were off to the races. So that got us started.
And so things are starting to look up again, and you've got 2 engineers working. You're able to build out the rest of the property portal. You've got the mortgage origination, and things are starting to go. What did it look like to test out a mortgage origination online in Chile?
It was awesome. It was a really great opportunity and interesting experience. So I had worked with the bank as their payment partner before this, and I sort of knew how it operated. But by them letting me originate mortgages for them was just a huge step. And what we did is we said, okay, well, we'll build a property portal, then we'll stick a financial calculator on it, or ram a bunch of traffic through it, and when people simulate, instead of hitting the bank, which they normally would, the thing was when you'd at the time, you would simulate your mortgage at the bank, and you would get a call like 28 days later.
Yep.
And at 28 days later, I mean, you've already drove to the bank, like 5 banks. That lead was dead as a doornail or whatever. And so we said, well, if they simulate on ours and we can originate this thing, we'll write a bunch of software, so you'll get a phone call within 5 minutes. So if, the moment you simulate, we'll run like our financial model on top of you and give you a phone call. So that was just game changing.
So you basically updated the 28-day Latin America, we'll call you back when we're ready style to the U.S. style of, if you fill out one of those online mortgage things, you're getting 10 calls from all different actors.
Yeah. And well, you'd only get 1 call from us. Mm-hmm. And we had went out and hired some bankers to work for us in-house. And so it was quite the setup. You would see the property, you would simulate, you would get a call. We do once you clicked it, we would analyze you, and then you get a call from a real banker in-house. And we'd start asking you the right questions. And as we're asking the questions, we'd start packaging up all the paperwork for you transparently. So this whole process took it down to where we can originate a mortgage within 4 days. And we were getting them funded. So the process down here was, I think from click to funding was something like 6 months. Mm-hmm. We were able to get people funded within 30 days. We take it, we pre-risk it, and then take it to risk analysis.
And if I remember right from one of the investor updates that you did with us, it was 87 times more efficient than the bank's online channel, something like that.
It was a ridiculous amount.
Yeah.
Like an obscene amount more efficient. At one point, we were 4% of all mortgages originated, by one of the largest banks in the country. So they went from not even on the map to 4% were coming online just through our channel.
Well, it seems like that should have been a big success, but what happened then?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, it was a success. We had done it. We had a 1-year pilot, and when the pilot was about to renew, they, I hate to say it, but basically pulled the rug from underneath us and said, hey, we're bringing it all in-house. We have our own brand new, financial calculator. You guys don't have the permission to originate anymore. And that just destroyed the company, basically, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I was in some of those meetings with the bank. It was pretty tough.
Tough is an understatement. It was, I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah. And one of the things that I took as a learning from there was that you really have to verify with everybody that you're working with that we're on the same page and get it in writing every single step of the way, and make sure that everybody is very, very clear, because I think we talk about B2B sales a lot inside of Magma, for Latin America and then also for the US. And in the US, the number one thing that you have to do when you go in and talk to a new potential client is to show them the benefit. Are you going to save a lot of time? Are you going to save a lot of money? Is this going to be a big success for your company? Because in the US, if they know that they've passed on you and now it goes to one of their competitors and they're starting to make a lot of money or saving a lot of time, that person who passed might have some consequences. Whereas in Latin America, it's the opposite. If the person passes on you if the person says yes to you and it fails, they might get fired.
They will get fired.
Probably will get fired.
Yeah.
So the number one thing for B2B sales for Latin America is this is super low risk. You're not going to get fired. There's very low risk of anything bad happening. And making sure that that's understood the whole way through the chain so that there aren't any miscommunications or people covering their ass basically with their higher ups.
Yeah.
Which is sort of what happened in this situation where on any metric it was clearly a success, but with some of the internal politics of the bank, it ended up not working.
If you're 87 times more efficient than a department that employs 50 people, it's going to be a big problem if they have to present that to their boss, that department itself. So, it was immediately clear that this was not going to work when they actually analyzed the results and said, this is going to make everyone look bad. Some outsider comes in and does something like this.
So, lose the contract. There's other banks out there.
We pitched almost all the banks in Chile, and they all said, "Yeah, this sounds great." Or, we had one, the largest bank in Chile, said, "We don't need more mortgages. We don't need." And maybe they didn't. It's not like the U.S. where you can CDO them and kick them off your books. Here, they have to keep them on the books. So your debt ratios matter here.
Yeah, the other thing that happened at the same time that was completely out of the company's control was that Chile went to the Basel II banking regulations, which requires banks to have more capital. And so because the Chilean banks keep all the mortgages on their books, or many of the mortgages on their books, they thought that mortgages were the lowest performing asset in terms of how much they could get returns on.
Right.
So it would immobilize a big amount of capital for 25 or 30 years. And so they started lending less, which was sort of the perfect storm between
politics and a lot of things.
Yeah.
So we were out, and it was a big deal, as that was sort of the core of our business. The property portal here wasn't to charge really real estate agents, money. It was more about just getting deal flow for the mortgages. And yeah, so that sort of blew up the business model. And we spent about a year trying to figure out different ways. We tried selling properties, we tried charging our clients, the real estate agents, more money, but we couldn't make up for how profitable it was to originate mortgages. And we burnt pretty much all of our investment. Yeah, and then we ejected.
And talk a little bit about why the Latin American real estate market in general is different from the U.S.
It's different in a lot of ways. The United States market has something that's really well thought out, which is the two-sided market. You have the buyer side and the seller side. Contract law is really strong in the United States, and if there's a 6% commission that they're going to split, they're going to split it. It's going to happen. Where down here, contract law is not strong. There is no such thing as a two-sided market, and somebody could sell the house, promise you commission, not give it to you, and then you're sort of out of luck.
At least in places like Chile or Colombia, you could probably sue them, but it's not like in the U.S. where you could take them to small claims court or maybe have a result in under a year. It might be 2-3 years before you get your result. So that means that there's no MLS, right?
Yeah. So for a lot of reasons, there's no two-sided market, so there's no tech stack to support that. So there is no MLS. There's no aggregation of properties, and that's a whole other set of problems. But we were able to build the second largest portal in the country without it. But when it came time to monetize it without, say, like a big banking partner, it was really, really hard. So that led to a lot of stuff.
So one of the similarities in the market, right, is that in the U.S. it's about 80% of the commissions go to the top 20 or 25% of agents. That's pretty similar in Chile as well, I think we saw.
Yeah. The agents were very distributed as far as income. The mobiliarios, those are what we say new home builders, are very concentrated here, and they control the market, in my opinion. So we'd have these big corporate customers, and they would pay some, but it was just very hard to make a startup style business that was going to make outsized returns. There was just no way that was going to happen.
So, I remember you tried a lot of different business models to make it work. So, charge the real estate agents about how much per month?
That was like $50 a month.
$50 a month. Did try to do an open door clone?
Yes, we tried that.
To buy properties for cash.
We bought a few.
And sell them off to investors, and did that. Tried to sell properties our own, sort of like a Compass.
Yeah, we tried that as well.
And it worked. I mean, we were getting
all of them worked.
All of them worked.
But all of them wouldn't scale to an interesting number, and they were a crazy amount of work. I mean, we even tried kicking off those mortgages to third parties. They're to sort of secondary financial institutions like insurance companies, and but nothing the scale that we were doing before. It just was too hard to replicate, and that sort of led to an eject moment where we had to make some hard decisions.
Well, what was the one thing that we're like, wow, this is really working on the tech side?
Yeah, so one thing that we knew that we were really good at was generating leads. We could generate leads for mortgages unlike anyone in the country, and part of that process we were generating leads for the real estate agents, and a crazy amount. So when we started to sell our own products, our own properties, we get 200 leads a week. And I remember being like, we hired a person just to sort through them, and it was a crazy amount. And my dad's a real estate agent in the United States, and I called him up one day and I was like, hey, how do you sort through 200 leads? What do you look for? What do you pick out? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about because I've never seen 200 leads in my life. And, we sort of had a chuckle, and then I'm like, no, seriously. I'm getting 200 leads a week. He's like, bullshit. There's no way you're getting 200 leads a week. He's like, I'm paying a ton of money to Zillow, and I might get 3 leads a week. Nobody gets that. And, yeah, that was sort of the eye-opening moment. So here we are, bleeding money. We lost $200,000, and I started talking more and more with my dad and some of his friends to see what they were paying for leads, and it was crazy amounts of money. They were paying on average, say $150 a lead.
I remember. So one of the things, I think it was probably 4 months or 5 months before deciding to make the jump to the U.S.
Yeah.
That we were talking probably over some beers here, about could we do this in the U.S. And I remember both of us being like, well, maybe, but I mean, someone's got to have done it there, right? It's got to be done. I mean, it's the U.S. market. There's lots and lots of great tech there.
Right.
Why do you think we thought that? I mean,
I think that's just normal, We were getting beat down so hard down here that, after all this time in Latin America and building products here, you're just like, oh, in the U.S. they got it figured out. And it didn't even occur to me until after we had talked to my dad and then a few more people. I'm like, why are they not getting the leads? This doesn't make any sense. I mean, aren't they using Instagram and Facebook and all this stuff and doing efficient lead capture? And we started looking, and the answer was no, they weren't doing it. And we didn't, even then we got to that sort of I don't believe this moment again. And I remember I was like, Nate, I'm going to use some of the money. We had no money left. I was like, I'm going to use the last bit of money. I'm going to fly to the U.S. and I'm going to go interview people.
I think that point highlights something that I think many people in the region, but also outside the region, don't understand, in that how hard it can be if you're not from the US, or maybe have been there a couple of times, to realize just how good your product is. So many of these Latin American entrepreneurs that we meet in Magma, or even successful ones that have done great businesses locally, they underestimate how good their product is and how well it could actually compete sort of in the quote-unquote big leagues in the US.
Right.
And I mean, if the two of us being from the US fell into that trap, imagine somebody with even fewer contacts, or maybe has only been once on a trip. And that's one of those things that, if you are listening and you are a Latin American entrepreneur, you probably, and you have a good business or a good tech, you probably can go to the US.
Yeah, sometimes what I saw, and now that I'm in both countries again and everything, like, the problems here are so different. The solutions that you create to like fix them here are totally different, and maybe an American entrepreneur wouldn't even think of that. And that's what I think what happened to us. We had this chicken and egg thing where, okay, there's no MLS, so we can't get all the properties, right? So that means even though we have this beautiful portal that we built, no one will go look at it because there's nothing there, right? And then we didn't have any money, so we had the real estate agents like, okay, you're gonna have to pay us because we have no cash to be in our portal that has no properties that no one looks at. It was like the stupidest sale in the world. Like, no one would ever do that. And we sat there thinking, like, well, we don't have a choice. Like, in the U.S., you'd probably raise some money, or you'd hook into the MLS. You would never start that bad. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, like, this is like the possible scenario. There's been, in the company that's been here 15 years, they have everything. Mm-hmm. And I remember in the office, like, thinking for like a week, like, how do we beat this? There's got to be a way. And I was like, well, what if we just took one property from one dude, charged him $50, and say took 25 and ran Facebook ads to that one property and made some really, slick ways to capture a lead. That dude would get some leads for sure, right? And Facebook ads are way cheaper here. Mm-hmm. And so we're like, okay, let's do it. And we found this one guy, Gamio. He was like this older guy that spoke English. Uh-huh. And me and him hit it off. And I was like, Gamio, let me upload your 50 properties, uh-huh. And this guy's like, yeah, whatever, dude. Just do it. And so I took his $50 and we got him a bunch of leads. And I remember that's how we grew this thing. So we started with one client and we went to 850 in 18 months, which for here was crazy growth. And it hadn't occurred to me that the United States had the exact same problem. Like, you could get all the properties, but you weren't getting the leads. Mm-hmm. And so that piece that we invented here to solve our problem was actually crazy efficient. And it was a new way of advertising. It's push marketing. It's not just waiting for people to come find your site.
So if you had to do it all over again, would you have made the jump to the States earlier?
Knowing what I know now, absolutely. A lot earlier. But, hindsight's 20/20. Mm-hmm. I had spent 10 years down here in Latin America building the companies, and I had friends, and sort of my identity was wrapped up in this is what I do. So going back to the U.S. without any money was super scary for me, actually, and it was. When I got back, we had no cash, and I went to go, sleep on my uncle's couch, and my girlfriend, now wife of 8 years, I couldn't bring her with me. We had no money, so it was like, this was a huge life change, and I'm like, man, if I mess this up, I mean, for sure, I'm driving Uber. Right?
This is what I always told you. You would have gotten a job at like Facebook and you would have been fine like 6 months later.
Yeah.
You never wanted to believe it.
You always want to like.
But it's true. It's true.
The downside of things. But I was pretty worried about the whole thing, and the product that we had, like, on paper was great, but it wasn't in English. When we started looking for investors in the States, that was a whole other story.
So you got there in September of 2015. Uh-huh. And what did you do? So you had a little bit of money left to keep paying the guys in Chile from...
So we still had our 2 guys, uh-huh. And a marketing person. So we were 3 people in Chile, on like, a very sort of low salary, all of us. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I went and stayed on my uncle's couch, borrowed his car, started driving around looking for investors, looking for clients that would like pre-sell anything. Mm-hmm. And it was a very hard sale because the product didn't exist. I'd point them to my site in Spanish in Chile, be like, yeah, I built the second largest portal. And they're like, great, where is it now? I mean, I can't use that. And I'm like, well, maybe in like 3 months you can. So.
And so you talk to people in LA and in Arizona, and then I flew in,
right,
and to come see what was going on, because I always sort of knew that if we could get this into English and get it in front of agents, we had something like that we were going to be able to sell.
Yeah, I mean, we did the math, and it was like, okay, Facebook's 8 times more expensive, but if we can replicate this, and then it was an unknown because we didn't have the funnel in the U.S. Maybe the psychology is different, you know, and that affects everything. But if we could replicate this, we would be, you know, orders and orders of magnitude more efficient than anything on the market. But that was a big if, and it was still in Spanish, and we were running out of money, and you know, it was a sort of a slingshot around the moon type thing.
Yep. So making the air filter out of duct tape from Apollo 13.
Yeah.
So we got to LA, and then what? What did we do?
Well, we went to go visit my old friend Mike that I met in Mendoza. He lived in Oakland, and so that was where we could stay for free. So we went to Mike's house, slept in his spare bedroom, and then started pitching, you know, VCs in San Francisco, which was an experience unto its own.
Why?
Basically, we weren't ready, and we had thought that, well, you know, I have this track record, and I went to Startup Chile, and I built this big company in Chile, and they're really hard things to do, you know? And so I would tell that story, and they would look at me and like, yeah, that's great, but we're not going to give you money because, you know, you're not even living here in the U.S. You don't have a product. You can't point me to anything. I can't call any of your clients. And I don't have a track record in the Valley, right? So this is all just for them, like, didn't feel real to them, I guess.
I remember one meeting where an investor told us that because you were from the U.S., that anything you had built outside of there was negative value because it was like, well, why didn't he do it in the U.S.? What's wrong with this guy?
Yeah, I mean, it was, yeah, exactly. So the guy's like, this is negative value. Like, if you're any good, you would have done it here. I think that was his comment.
Yep.
And then second, like, if what you're saying is true, why don't you come back in 6 months when you have clients? You know, show me 10 clients I can pick up the phone and call. We'll talk to you for a second time. And that happened, you know, more than once. And so I'm sitting there burning my last dollar, driving around, and that was just a very, very hard sale. A lot harder than I thought it'd be.
Yeah, it was a lot harder than I thought it would be, too. I mean, I sort of assumed from looking at it from a value perspective and from an investor perspective, if you and the team have proven that you were able to build a good product that people were using, and all that needed was, you know, 3 months of translating it, putting it into the U.S. market, I would have thought that at least some of the angel investors would have, probably not, you know, a fund might be too big already, but I would have thought that someone would have been, you know what, I'm going to take $100K bet on these guys, because the valuation wasn't crazy at that time.
Not at all.
But what I saw and what we saw was that it just was not happening.
No, it wasn't happening, and I think it was just very, very different from anything that they'd seen before. You know, we were like, yeah, we built this whole product off like $200K. We're the second largest portal, and people would look at us like BS.
Oh yeah, remember in LA when we were in a meeting with an entrepreneur who's been pretty successful and had raised a nice round, and he asked what our burn rate was, and I told him, I said it was like, you know, 150K, and he was like, oh wow, you must have like a lot of income, or you got a big, how much money did you raise? And I had to stop, and I deadpanned. I was like, no, that's in the year. And he basically was like, I don't believe you, and almost like kicked us out of the office.
Yeah, that guy, he was he had burned $2 million in 2 years, $1 million a year. And for him, you know, he didn't have that big of a team. And so, I don't know, I think it was just very odd for those people to one, hear our story, and then two, believe it. So.
And it's not just with you. I mean, I've seen it with other Magma companies where, and we had Devin from Group Raise on the podcast previously, and he talked about his story of how he raised money in the U.S. and he had a lot of these same questions, even though his product was in the States and had thousands of clients using it and paying him money in the States. There was still a lot of skepticism of like, well, why do you have a back office for tech and sales in Latin America? I just don't get it. Why don't you just fire them all and move them to the U.S.? So can you talk a little bit about what the advantages are to having Latin American office?
I mean, the Latin American office was key to everything. One, it helped us figure this whole thing out. And two, there's great people down here. There's great people in, on the engineering side, on the design side. There's a lot of foreigners here that you could use for customer support or sales, marketing, that would probably normally just be teaching English. There's not a lot of tech scene out here yet. So if you say, hey, instead of teaching English for $500 a month, you can come work for me for like triple that money. That's an easy sale. And so you can get talent down here where it's a lot less competitive, and for a lot cheaper than the United States. I hate to say exactly how much cheaper, but
so we'll dive into more specifics in a bit here. Let's keep going with this story. So we've gotten told no all across California. Laughed out of some meetings. Yeah,
laughed out of meetings in San Francisco for sure. San Francisco was a hard road. We were not ready for that. Then we tried LA. We made some inroads in LA, but nothing solid. And then we decided to rent a car, and we're just like, screw it. We're going to drive across the U.S. We'll go talk to anyone who will talk to us, and see if we can get a pre-sale or get an investment. And we started working our own personal networks. Nate, called up, old people that invested into him. We tried everything. And we just did one meeting after another, which was really wild.
So, and how was it talking to potential clients and selling at the same time as talking to potential investors?
I think clients were easier than investors. Like pre-selling them on something that doesn't exist was a hard one, but they were all very receptive to like, well, if I gave you 100 leads per month, how much would you pay me? And they were like, well, if you could give us 100 leads, then we would pay you a ton of money. And so every now and then we get a check, but that they didn't really care how you did it. If you could really do it, it was sort of like magic to them. Mm-hmm. So we'd get pre-sales every here and there, but they understood it. They knew like, okay, more leads in my funnel, more chances for me to close a house. I make a good commission. That was sort of a no-brainer for those guys.
And that was a pretty intense trip. We started out in LA, went up to San Francisco, back to LA, across to Arizona. Then we drove all the way.
We had a meeting in Dallas.
Yeah, drove all the way to Dallas. Drove through a tornado.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Nate was speeding at night in the rain. It's a very sketchy trip.
Adrian's control issues came out. It was good. We
got
to know each other even at another level.
Yeah, we had a full spectrum there of adventure.
Yep.
And
we sat down with a friend of mine who had I'd done business with before, and we gave him the pitch, and I think it was...
We're all alone in the restaurant. You got to set... The scene was crazy. He had a bunch of food laid out, and we go into this restaurant in a sort of a strip mall type place, mm-hmm. and it was just... it was fun.
But it was interesting because, one, I mean, he knew me. We'd done business before, but he also saw the business from a different perspective than most of the U.S. investors in California that we had met so far.
Yeah.
From his perspective, and I think the reason he invested was, I'm going to take a bet on these guys at a valuation that's much lower than I would hit in California and if I have to invest today.
Or even Dallas.
Or even in Dallas, pretty much anywhere in the U.S. And if these guys say do what they say they're going to do, I'm going to make a lot of money. It's just a pure value bet.
Right.
And it's interesting to me talking with a lot of professional VCs that have not really seen that yet. Some are seeing it, and there's good reception. But it was interesting that it took our first U.S. check came from somebody who they just saw a quick value investment. And once we got that first check, we were able to talk with some other U.S. investors from our network who put in money. And
yeah, it was sort of like that one check opened up the rest of the checks.
Yeah, and then, we had, from Magma, we had some money that was coming in on that round too. And we were able to get about $100,000 together between everyone to keep it going so we could launch the product.
Yeah, so that was the point where, we broke through a little bit. So I think, I don't know, there's 5 or 6 people that we rounded up together, and we got about $100,000. We completed the trip. We made it all the way to New York.
Yep.
Pitched some serious people in New York. Learned a lot. And
well, can you talk about the fact or just the speed or the difference in the tech scene in cities in the U.S. compared to if you're just sort of in Latin America? One of the big differences when you came back?
Yeah, so people were very good as far as what to look for and what questions to ask. I know why you're asking this question because of New York. There was an incident in New York, and so we made it all the way to New York. We had pitched everyone. We got a lot of no's, but no like bad things had really happened. You hear these horror stories, There's a lot of no thank yous, but no like, get the F out of here type moments. And in New York, we had pitched somebody that had built a similar company, not for real estate, but for ad tech. And we were going through our pitch, and, at one point I was saying, we place the ads, and I have a team of people down here that do it for me and for like a fraction of the price. And this guy just looked at me funny and just said, stop. And he's like, what do you mean you have a team of people that place ads? And I'm like, well, the people have to place the ads. And he's like, well, wait, whoa, what do you mean? And he's like, why don't you use the API? And I'm like, what API? And he's like, wrong answer. He's
go home and find out.
Yeah, he's just like, wrong answer, dude. I'm gonna bring you an apartment meeting. They're gonna just tear you to shreds. You're gonna cry. I think that was literally what he told me. And I didn't know what he's talking about. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I don't see any API for He's like, Facebook has an API to place ads, and I was like, no, it doesn't. And he's like, you think or you know? And I'm like, I think. And he's like, nah, man. And he picked up the phone and called someone at Facebook, I believe, and was like, yeah, this old company you worked for was doing like a crazy amount of money on an API. You're an idiot. Get out of my office. And I was just like in shock. And I remember I left, and I got like lost on the subway, and I ended up in Times Square or somewhere, one of these, iconic places, just sitting there like, what have I done with my life? And I was like, this guy, like, he can't be right. And so I pulled up my, I started a new Facebook page and I started a new business account, and sure enough, the API was there. And what happened is that when we started in Chile, the ad API wasn't available since it was outside the United States, and I never saw it. So we had built this whole business model around like placing ads with people, and we could just do this straight through an API. And so I remember being like, this guy just like schooled me so hard, and he knew exactly what he was talking about. And I called up my dev team the next day. We rewrote the software, that piece of it, so it would work with APIs, not people. And then I wrote him a letter apologizing for wasting his time. And, he wrote me back like, yeah, good luck, dude. No worries. But that was a huge learning,
And so after the trip, we get the 100K in.
Yeah.
Magma put some money in, and got head down, starting to work. What happened then?
Yeah, so got back, had a little money, flew in my girlfriend, got married, got an apartment. We had this kitchen table, and I'd sit there with the phone and started cold calling people, try to do pre-sales. While my back office here in Chile was translating as fast as they could the app and trying to get it hooked up to, the providers of listings so we could actually launch a portal. So it took us about 6 months probably in total to get everything working, where we had clients, we had the properties through the MLS feeds, and a real product.
I remember our mantra always being, because we had been told by a couple people in investor meetings or other entrepreneurs, like, get to $10,000 of monthly recurring revenue, because as soon as we get that, you're going to be able to raise a decent amount of money. Maybe not millions, but maybe you'll be able to get $250K or $1 million at a nice valuation.
Right.
And what happened?
A lot of stuff happened, but we got there. I mean, what?
But I remember we hit the 10K pretty fast.
Oh yeah, we hit the 10K, and then we went back to everyone. We're like, okay, we got 10K, and they're like, yeah, hit 15.
Yeah.
And then we're like, shit, all right. So then we went and hit 15. We came back to say hit 30. And so that like the goalpost just kept moving. That's what happened. Yeah, I remember that piece.
Yeah, so that to me was really surprising as well.
Yeah.
And
we had like a checklist that I got from San Francisco, which was like, move to the States, don't ever talk about Latin America, get 10,000 in sales, and then call us back. So we like checked off 1, 2, 3, and then they're like, yeah, get 15,000, and I'll meet you. And then I say, well, I want to see how long it takes you to get to 30, right? We want to measure that, and like send me more, more proof, and send me phone numbers, and like the due diligence that we were hitting from everybody was just super crazy.
It was interesting because when I would call up my previous investors from other companies. I would talk to my entrepreneur friends in New York, San Francisco, Oakland, LA, who had raised money, and showed them the product and told them about it. They were like, I don't understand why you're only asking for $250K or $500,000.
Yeah,
like,
maybe that was it.
What do you? No, it's just like, what are you doing? It's like, well, we have asked for bigger amounts as well, and they just say no. And they're like, well, I don't understand. So there was some disconnect between, and looking back now, I think it was still the Latin America thing, and then also the fact that the company looked weird to people.
I don't think we fit the pattern. I mean, I applied to YC 4 times, and was rejected 4 times, and tried to figure out why I was rejected 4 times and still couldn't get through. And I was like, well, what am I, a shitty entrepreneur? I mean, I'm hitting the numbers, I'm making money. I'm like, this thing's gonna be profitable in another 4 months. Like something's up. And I remember the first time we met with somebody who got it, and they were just like, holy shit, like, okay, so you're generating leads for $1 and you can sell them for $150. They're like, where do I sign? And that was an eye opener. It's like we had been talking to the wrong people. And yeah. And
so got to the right people, and finally were able to sort of break through. What happened?
So we found a couple right people, actually. The moment that somebody saw it, we knew what to look for, and we found a few people in the real estate industry that had built massive companies before, and they took a look at the product, ran through it, and they're like, oh yeah, this is going to be huge. And so we're super happy, and we have the first guy. He offers us a big check, and he had been very successful in the past, had made half a billion dollars, I think, and a crazy amount of money. And we thought, things were great. And that sort of like turned into this relationship where it didn't work out, right? The deal fell through. And we had another partner that we thought could be a good fit. And that turned out to be the right one. So I don't know how to say it in an elegant way, but we ran through a couple people. Like once we found what to look for, we found a few people and sort of upped the valuation and found the right partner.
And at the same time, getting more and more sales.
Yeah, we were selling the whole time now that we had figured our niche out.
And so, what's the product today?
So the product today it's a search portal like Zillow, and if you went to go see it at PropertySimple.com, it would sort of feel like that. But there's a whole bunch of underlying tech that's totally different. We use this concept of pushing things out to the right people. We wrote a bunch of software to create smart ad sets, create smart creative. We use AI to analyze our past performance, and we can create these beautiful ads on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and push them to the right people. So organically within, say, like a real estate agent's own personal network, and then also via paid advertising. And so we wrote software that automates this, so we can do it for 1 agent or 1,000 agents, doesn't matter. And what that does is it goes out, places ads, brings people in, and then aggregates information about sort of what we learn, and finds sort of the right people that are interested in the property. And then we took it a step farther. We wrote our own CRM software, and we connected everything up with sort of a little bit of intelligence. So somebody would come to the site, they would see an ad on, say, one of these platforms like Facebook or Instagram, click it, come into the site, start looking at properties, and we would analyze if we thought they were really interested or not. And the next thing you know, they'd get an email or some kind of communication from the real estate agent. And all of that process was automated. And we used all the new sort of AI APIs that came out to streamline some of the trickier parts of it. And it's works great, actually. like the cost per lead and everything. It's all very interesting.
And so with the new product, able to get more clients and close a nice sized round and nice size valuation.
That's right. Yeah.
And another thing that's interesting is that the price point. So it started out with a much more primitive product in Chile for
$50.
Yeah, 2,500 pesos per month. Yeah. $50. And then what happened?
So it went from $50 in Chile. When we first got to the U.S., I had sort of friends and family in there at $500 a month. And so the idea being like, hey, instead of spending $500 on sending out postcards, give it to us and we'll do something way better, which was an easy sale initially. But what we saw is we're sort of targeting a niche of the market that $500 was a lot of money for them. And then once we saw that working and we started getting the attention of some of the bigger agents, we're like, there are agents out there spending $50,000 a month on marketing and assistance and everything, and they're not doing half as much as we do. And so we moved the price point up again to $2,500 a month. Going after that agent that would have a marketing assistant out there, like pounding the pavement, placing ads, writing up content, doing all these things, keeping their CRM up to date, and that's been awesome. So now the price has moved up considerably now at $2,500 a month, and it's a good price point for that. There's a lot of value there.
And so what do you think, what are your thoughts on pricing software, and especially in software as a service?
So when you're a startup, it's hard. The price that you price things matters, and when you need to make some money, you should price it appropriately. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that you can go probably higher than you think if you're actually delivering real value. You might have to go up segment, but many times there are people that can pay that. And so that's what we did. We're not dealing with huge companies, but we've gone quite a bit up segment.
And I think is Mark Andreessen who says that the number one advice he'd give to startups is to charge more. Yeah. And that goes like 10x for Latin American startups that are especially going to the U.S. market. And we have another company in our portfolio that started not quite as dramatically of 50 to 2,500, but they started at $9 a month and are now, their top plan is about, I think it's $1,000 a month. So, or maybe it's a little bit less, but it's only because they were going to the U.S. market, but they were like, tenían vergüenza. They were like, embarrassed, yeah. To charge more. And so don't be afraid of that, especially if you're from outside the U.S.
Yeah, if you're delivering real value, you can charge for it.
So things are going good today, and you've got an office in the U.S. and you've got an office in Chile. How many people are in the Chilean office?
So we're about 10 people here in Chile. I think there's 3 or 4 of us in the United States right now, and then a few overseas in London and other places. So we're a 15-person team. We're making a decent amount of money. Our investor also owns a real estate agency, one of the biggest in the U.S., and that gives us a really quick in to continue scaling sales. So, it was sort of a long journey, but it's now really paying dividends. We're able to keep our costs down, our quality up with the Latin American office. We built an incredible team and sort of have the benefits of both worlds. We do the sales and the scaling in the United States, and then the talent and retention of that talent in Latin America.
And so what are some of the disadvantages of having a remote team where you're in the States and they're in Chile?
I think that the disadvantage is always going to be communication. It's hard to communicate on different time zones. As we're scaling this company, there's a lot going on. It's very high bandwidth, right? The product's changing, the marketing's changing, the sales strategies are changing. To keep that communication back and forth is hard. And then also there's the softer things, which is the people and the culture and, the quality of sort of office life. You can't really see it until you're there. So, for example, in our case, we had scaled from 3 people to 10, and I think 7 months or something. and we hadn't changed offices, and so we had 10 people crammed in this tiny office. And you know, they brought it up like a month ago. They had been in there for a long time. And when I flew down, I was like, oh my God, you know, we got to get you out of here, guys. I'm so sorry. You know, I didn't realize how bad it was. So we've quadrupled office space for the same amount of people. And I still think they're packed in tight, you know? So those things they're hard to see until you're here, and they matter. So trying to make frequent trips, keep the communication high, build a lot of trust, all those things are more difficult, I would say.
Do you have any specific strategies you use to mitigate those disadvantages?
So
software strategies, anything like that?
Yeah, we came up with a bunch of things. A lot of new technology we implemented. For example, Facebook's Workplace turned out to be a lifesaver. We had tried Trello, which we still use for some of the developer stuff, but we tried it for the whole company. We tried Asana. We tried Slack, but the Facebook Workplace was sort of more fun. Everyone immediately knew how to use it, and we share non-work things there like photos and memes and whatnot. So that just keeps people a lot happier than before. So that helped the communication. We implemented things like Tiny Pulse to see how people were feeling. Like you can anonymously, you know, oh, this sucks, or this is great, or, you know, they have this thing, I think it's called Cheers for Peers. You can say like, hey, you know, thanks for shipping that piece of the product to another developer. So just certain things to get people like talking and engaging more on the software side helped. We implemented, instead of just a weekly stand-up, we did daily stand-ups plus a weekly roundup with everyone in the United States. But that meant that I'm on the phone with Chile every single day. So I wake up at 6 in the morning, fire up FaceTime, or now we use the Workplace, and chat with, you know, each core department, see how things are. If there's a problem somewhere that we detect, I might chat with a particular employee. All these things to keep the communication, I think, is the biggest part, you know.
And then going into the advantages. So we already talked a little bit about the fact that you can find great people for a value price. Beyond that, what are some of the other advantages that you see?
Latin America's neat because I think it's more of a cultural fit in some ways than, say, you know, I don't know, maybe somewhere in Asia. Just because, I don't know how to put it, but I feel like there's more of a culture fit, first off. Mm-hmm. You know, people in Latin America are generally pretty happy and fun and easy to get along with. So one, it's fun to work with them. Some of the advantages, besides price, mm-hmm. It's cheaper. Like if you could do with a 10-person team with what you could do with a 2-person team on the same money in the U.S., for example, that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, like $1 million investment from in the U.S. is like probably at least a $5 million investment in the U.S. is like the same as getting $1 million in Chile, or maybe even more. You know,
the other way around, flipped around.
Yeah, where you get, you know, if you only get $1 million in Chile, that's like the same as raising $5 million in the U.S.
Yeah,
not more.
It's
it might be more.
We don't know, but I know the math of it is like a ton.
Yeah.
So that's one piece. The second piece is there's not a lot of people doing interesting things here. So you really do have the pick of talent. Somebody who might be really great working at a bank, but then maybe they don't have any upward mobility. You could capture someone like that here, and they'd be excited about coming to work. So I really see this thing where everyone at the company is like very excited to be here, and that's hard to find. I think anywhere really.
Yeah, I think that's definitely interesting. I think the talent is really impressive for people who don't see it. I mean, there's really good people here. I always say it's just misaligned or misdeployed, because you'll have somebody who could do something amazing and they end up working at a bank where they're just sort of keeping up 20-year-old code and not doing anything new.
Yeah, and I mean, these people, they you know, these are young countries, man. People want to do stuff. They want to break out, and there's not a lot of avenues for that. So the startup is sort of a good fit, and if you can make it appear like it's a stable bet, because that's part of sort of the psychology down here as well. If you can sort of mix this, like, hey, this is stable, but we're cutting edge and we're doing some crazy stuff, it's something that's really attractive down here.
So if you had to give advice to Latin American entrepreneurs who are either thinking of going to the U.S. or have started going to the U.S., what would be a couple things that you would tell them to try to do if they want to be successful there?
I would tell them, one, to go to the U.S. Physically go there. I know it's hard, and they have a lot of barriers that probably I didn't have. But if they can get down there somehow, that's going to be huge for them. So one thing is try to be there. The second thing I would say is go out and get clients. Take what you're charging and keep upping the price until someone, multiple people tell you it's too expensive. Mm-hmm. Find that sort of upper barrier because you're probably going to need it. That's another good one. And I would say, have your keep your back office guys here. Keep a couple friends out here or wherever your home country is working on the product while you go out and sell. And I think, easier said than done. I think it's a tricky one. But if they can get down there, start selling, or, fundraising themselves in person while somebody down here is keeping, the ship afloat, they're going to have a huge advantage that people in the U.S. with U.S. companies don't have. Like, it's hard. It's really hard and expensive to keep your ship afloat in California. Just having one developer while you're out driving around trying to meet clients is money. Where here, you're saving a lot of cost.
I think one of the pieces of infrastructure that we didn't mention is the VoIP phone with a U.S. number.
Yeah, there's technology today. So you can have all U.S. phone numbers here in the office. You can make it feel transparent. That's, I think, not an issue. Where when I started 10 years ago, you were in a cyber cafe and literally they had these phone boxes that you had to go in there to call back to the U.S. VoIP technology was super weird back then and nobody had it. Now it's, you can get Vonage, stick it in your office, buy it in the States, stick it here, and it costs the same, and it's transparent. Mm-hmm. So tech makes it easy, but the part that's not easy is the actual physical locations, the culture difference, sending money between countries, and just getting that whole buy-in from both sides. I think that's what we experienced. We went to the U.S. and we're we can build this, but we didn't have buy-in. They were yeah, I don't know what that looks like, so no. And, the team here, they're you left. What are you doing? Mm-hmm. It took a while for us to convince them, this is the way, So.
And what about for investors in the U.S.? What should they be looking for the next time they see a company like PropertySimple that's got a founder that's in the States and their tech team in Latin America?
Yeah, I think they should... obviously do their due diligence and whatnot. But if you see somebody that's hungry like that, and they have a track record in their own country, and they made it to your office in California and San Francisco, and they're sitting there, that's harder than just driving down the street from one office where you work at Twitter and being I'm going to start something cool, and then walking 3 blocks to go do a VC pitch. Yes, I'm sure you built something awesome, but some dude that was sitting in Chile or in Mendoza, some small town, that found a way to your office and has something, the amount of effort required should show you that person's got some grit. And I think that's what maybe they sort of glossed over. If I applied to YC 4 times, how many times until they want to talk to you, I think there's an attitude that maybe they can pick up on. This person got here and they're not knocking. If they're gonna knock on my door, and they're gonna keep knocking. I see that from some of these guys out here, that make it to the U.S. That wasn't easy for them. They're probably gonna be just fine. That's mm-hmm. what I think.
Well, I think that's a pretty good spot to end. And do you have anything else to add that you'd like to get on?
No, I think we covered a ton of stuff.
We did.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we're gonna do a round 2. Once PropertySimple keeps growing, come back for an update, maybe 6 months down the road. Thanks for being on the podcast. We spent a lot of time together over the last 4 or 5 years, so it's good to get it on record here, and hopefully it's useful to...
I appreciate it.
It's been good.
Good times. Funny remembering all this stuff.
Yeah, it's been good. All right. I'll talk to you later.
All right,
thanks for coming.